How
Right,
you
man.
doing, Jamie?
I'm good, Sam.
Yeah, I'm great. Yeah, how's your week been? Better than mine, I think.
Yeah, you've been chunning, mate. My week's
Yeah,
been
I've
good.
been a
I got
little
offered a
ill.
job, so
Have you? Okay, let's talk about that first.
I I haven't actually had the contract yet, so this is not set in stone. Maybe it's a bad omen to talk about it, but they've offered me a job as a web dev, doing like PHP and
Oh,
WordPress, which is
awesome,
crazy
awesome.
because I started coding like 6 weeks ago. So
That's fantastic. That's so cool. What? How did you find it, and what's the company?
it's the same company I'm with at the moment, um, in London, and they
Okay, it's the CEO shadowing thing,
yeah.
the
And
healthcare.
I was like,
Okay.
I really don't know much. And they were like, yeah, you'll figure it out. So it's kind of nice. I guess I'm kind of getting sponsored in a way. So
That's sick.
yeah, that's been my week.
Nice one, man.
And
Very cool.
I've also, Wordle. I've made a Wordle clone as just practice. So it's,
Awesome.
It actually is. There's a big learning curve. You have to it's easy to make a program that will do like 2 + 2 = 4, or like, I don't know, some automate some simple system. But to make something that has like a front end, back end, and all this stuff, it gets a little bit more complicated. So
Oh yeah, yeah.
yeah,
That's far beyond what I've ever done in school when I was programming, that kind of thing, like front ends, back ends, like APIs and shit. I never got onto that. So
you see, like at a simple level,
that's
it's
cool.
really not that complicated. But when you come to do it, you have to understand a few things before you can understand a few other things, and then it gets a bit like you just have to get over the hurdle. I've kind of discovered. So yeah, man.
That's sweet, and I think it shows that the company trust you as a sober and rational and like intelligent person, that they're just like, okay, we're going to give you a completely different job now that's kind of related to your interests, and you're just going to figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like a trial by fire, hey? I don't know. It feels like
Yeah,
I'm
it
getting
is,
kind
but
of
maybe
sponsored. We'll see.
Yeah, well, that might be what you need. Maybe
Yeah.
a trial by fire isn't necessarily a bad thing, It's like, me going to Taiwan in some sense. It's just like, all right, now you're in the deep end, and, it transforms you to some extent. So I
It
think
does.
it will be a huge step up for you.
Yeah,
And
actually, that's
are
a really
you
good
doing,
comparison.
is that 5 days a week?
Yeah,
Is
it'll be
it
5 days a week, man. Yeah.
Hell yeah. So the birdseed factory is on its last days.
Yeah, they don't know it yet. I'll tell them as soon as I can.
Oof.
I've kind of hit
Do you
the
know when
limit
you
with
start?
listening to podcasts, Like I've started listening to podcasts that are not about self-development at all, just for like entertainment. So I'm like, yeah, it's probably time to go.
Yeah, sure. Well, now you're making your own, mate. You've gone from the consumer to the producer.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
So have
next
you,
stage of the podcast.
We've both done
Well, I
that
guess
warehouse
so.
shift, haven't we, of just listening to stuff. Podcasts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did a lot of that. Yeah. So, hell yeah, man. That's sweet.
So I have my little book of philosophy in front of me that
Oh yeah.
I make notes myself from whatever I've read. It doesn't have to be philosophy. It could be podcast as well. You've seen it. It's got the Great Wave on the front.
I've seen it. No,
Yeah.
it's a nice little book.
And there's a quote from Seneca that I love, and I've heard it repeated quite a lot in other podcasts, which is, "If a man knows not to which port he sails, no wind is favourable."
Interesting. That hits home, considering I'm a uni student who hasn't figured out exactly what he's going to do when he graduates yet. So,
Well, I guess
definitely applies to me.
you have so many opportunities, and if you don't know what you want, how do you pick them?
Exactly. Which port am I sailing to? Yeah. I think vision is super important to just, even if it's not like a niche, it's just like, just narrow down your options from like 100 to like 10. And then, maybe you still don't know the exact port, but you know which country the port is in or something like that, and I think it takes away, it gives you certainty, and it takes away the anxiety of picking what you're going to do. And maybe your version of this is coding, right? It's like, okay, you have ideas, but you don't, it's not like you've sat down and gone, this is the business I'm going to start. Like, this is the exact kind of like future I want for myself. This is exactly how my company's going to be. Instead, you're just looking at it like, I'm trying to get really good at coding and then attract a bunch of cool opportunities based on that, if that makes sense.
It's kind of
just
like,
having a skill that you're honing down.
rather than selecting the exact coordinates of where you're going, you're like, I'm going east, somewhere east. And if anyone gives you
Sure,
opportunities that are
sure.
west, you're like, nah, we're going east. mate."
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I was talking to one of my buddies about this over the phone, and he's in the process of not panicking, but feeling very uncertain about his future because he's a uni student like me, and he's trying to figure out what he's going to do. And he was asking for my advice, which is funny because I haven't got over that hurdle yet either. But we were discussing it, and he is desperate to like find out like his niche and the exact kind of job he wants to do, and he's feeling super overwhelmed because he's got a lot of different skills and a lot of different paths he could take. Like, a smart guy, but he was saying to me, you know, like, I don't know what my niche is going to be yet, if that makes sense. And I think it relates to all of this because it's like, you know, maybe just focus on a skill and just attract opportunities towards you, as opposed to like chasing this one specific coordinate grid, so to speak, in this analogy, and just sail east, as opposed to being like, I'm sailing to this city in Japan. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think, like, from my experience of, you know, I've had a year of kind of being unemployed, just figuring out how to make business work and what skills I need and things like that. And I've tried a bunch of different things. And it's really hard to nail down for you what giving up looks like versus what like pivoting looks like. Or not even pivoting, just like moving on. Like, okay, this is not for me. Like, I'd rather outsource this thing or whatever. Now, I'm talking very businessy here, but, you know, it could just be for choosing a career. You're like, maybe I shouldn't be a translator because XYZ or whatever. Like, I just don't enjoy this part of it or whatever. So, like, I had the experience with 3D modeling. You have to make sure you really commit, though, in the same breath. Like, I really committed to learning 3D modeling for, like, a few months. Maybe that isn't commitment if it's just a few months. But I did do it, like, 8 hours a day for a few months and learned to build some cool stuff. And then I was like, yeah, this is going to be 10 years of work for something that do I really want? It's not been like that with coding.
Sure.
Coding's been much more
And I think
rewarding.
it's sure, and I think that's just part of like narrowing it down from I'm going to east to I'm going southeast, if that makes sense. You're just constantly iterating on your direction and like building a higher definition picture of like exactly what your niche is, so to speak. And I don't even necessarily mean business niche. Like you said, it can be career as well. I mean, you need a career, and you need a niche in your career as well, right? But I think you have to start kind of broad.
It's like a flight path, isn't it? You know, where they just constantly correct onto the flight path.
Sure.
So, but then they know exactly where they're going. But
they do. But the analogy, yeah, it still makes sense.
Yeah, it
like
still
works.
Course correction as you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And I also think another thing is like, I think you know, something I said to this guy on this phone call was like, a quote that I like that I heard is that you don't pursue success, you attract it. And I think as much as, who did you say said that? Was it Seneca?
Yeah.
The original quote. So as much as Seneca's advice is sound, I think if you break it down into steps, I think if you pursue a very specific thing, and I mean very specific, I mean like this business or something like that, as a project to improve your coding skills, that's absolutely fine, and that's probably what you need. But pursuing like a very specific life that is 20 years down the line from now, I think is very overwhelming, and like not that many people can necessarily do that. But just seeing it as like, in your analogy, my current direction that I'm sailing towards is just improving my coding as much as possible. That is like kind of all you need, because there's always going to be like an element of serendipity, of luck, and of once you learn to code and you kind of know what that landscape looks like, you're going to say, okay, this is the landscape, and now I know that tree is where I want to go. And so you've painted a picture of the whole landscape, which is coding, but now you're going down a much more specific path. And I think that is much wiser and much more effective to do that bit first and then to walk towards the tree, than to be like, well, I think there's going to be a tree over that horizon, and so I'm going to walk there, because I think that can be demoralizing, and you probably won't do it, because you've got to learn all the foundational stuff first, and you've got to kind of open the coding door, or in my case, the Chinese door, right? Rather than being like, this is the job I want to do in China. It's more like, how about I just get really sick Chinese first and then see what people offer me based on my skill set and see what opportunities come my way.
I suppose there's a balance in between, because I think both ends of the spectrum are very anxiety inducing. If you've got no idea where you want to go, that's pretty anxiety inducing. And if you have a very specific goal 20 years down the line, it's probably also, like you say, I mean, how do you know you're going to get there? It's pretty anxiety inducing. Probably a lot.
How do you know the tree exists?
Yeah,
you know?
that
like
exactly.
maybe it's just not viable. Yeah,
a lot of pressure on yourself. I think actually Seneca would very much agree with the quote that you said about you're not pursuing success, you attract it, which is kind of like, I guess there's a little bit of a nugget of Seneca's kind of Stoic philosophy in there, which is you can't choose to be successful. You can deserve it, but you can't make it happen because it's not within your control,
sure.
right? So, but then I guess in his quote, if a man knows not to which port he sails, no wind is favourable. Like, he's saying there might be a wind that's favourable, but he didn't say anything about there being like a sea creature that eats you up or whatever on the way. So it's possible. You know,
sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess it's just one of those little Stoic nuggets.
Yeah, that's great. There's also the Bhagavad Gita, which is the Hindu scripture, has a similar quote of like, and it's the exact same wisdom. It's you don't have a right to the action. No, sorry. You have a right to the action, but you don't have a right to the fruit of the action. And that basically just means you have every right to become to will yourself to be the person who deserves success, but you at no point have a right to success. You just have a right to deserve it, if that makes sense.
And
in other words, focus on what you can control.
That is an antidote to the anxiety that you might feel at the start of figuring out which port you want to sail to. And during.
Yes, I think. Sure, I completely agree. And I like the sea monster analogy as well because, you know, the world changes and you change and spanners get thrown in the works all the time. And, you know, maybe you don't even really want to end up at that port anyway, even if it does exist, you know?
Yeah, you didn't realise it. Hey, man, you heard it here first on the Shed podcast, the sea monster.
Mm-hmm. Hell yeah.
Just adding to Seneca's work. So, should we move on?
Yeah, casually. Yeah.
Jordan Peterson, in his first, I don't know if it was his first book.
Another
I don't think
philosopher.
It was his first book, in 12 Rules for Life.
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly what he calls the rule, but it's like, tell the truth, or at least don't lie, I think is the rule. So, I've written here, be truthful, even if it elicits a negative response. I found it really hard in my life to actually live by that. Because sometimes there are things that are, you know, you don't want to say something that is true but like hurts someone's feelings, but it's better in the long run.
Yeah, I think it relates a little bit to what we've just been talking about, which is Stoicism and going with the flow and controlling what you can. Because, you know, like the way I've heard Jordan Peterson talk about this quote is like, you know, telling the truth is the ultimate adventure and it aligns you with the truth of the world, which actually gives you the best shot at understanding it and being successful in it, essentially, rather than having a facade or a persona that you have to put on because you've told so many lies about who you are. And so when you're by yourself and while you're with your peers, you're like two different people, right? And that creates a lot of mental fatigue and means that people don't perceive you correctly and so thus don't, like, you know, maybe offer you the opportunities you deserve, or maybe they offer you opportunities that you don't deserve, something like that. And that actually, if you can just have the courage to be disliked and have the courage to disappoint people and tell the truth about how you feel about certain things, although that's harder and that leads to more uncertainty in the short term, it actually makes the world easier to map because everyone has a clearer position of where you are in it, and to some extent you have a clearer idea of where you are in it because you know that the feedback, so to speak, you get from people, like the way people treat you and things, is more appropriately in line with the truth, if that makes sense. Like, it's not just about you telling the truth about how you feel, but it's also puts the truth around you, if that makes sense, which is what you want. If you think about starting a business or something, and you're trying to gather information and data points about, you know, a certain niche, whether or not it has, you know, product market fit or something like that, you need those to be as accurate as possible. There's no point collecting data to reinforce your business idea if you know it's false. And I think it's true for your life generally. You just need as many true data points around you as possible to attract that success. And I think that starts with telling your truth as well to other people.
I think it's all about your time horizon as well. So, for example, with this job I've been offered, I could have lied and said, yeah, I'm a pro dev. Like, I can do anything with coding or whatever. And, I mean, they offered me the job anyway. But imagine they offered it to me with the expectation that I can already do it, just because I've lied. And then you get yourself in a pickle. So it's like great success in short term, and it's like massive failure in long term. My mum has this saying where I think it's, oh, the tangled web you tie when you lie, basically. And it's true, because you lie about something and then you have to cover that up, and someone starts picking at it and you lie about that, and you create this big mess of a lie. And yeah, like you say, it just slows you down. You're not taking the optimal path, but then it's really hard to live by it.
Definitely. I mean, it's, you know, human beings, like, I heard a quote that, like, all that personal development actually is getting you to realize that you have to prioritize the long term over the short term. And the more decisions you make to prioritize the long term over the short term, to some extent will determine your long term success. Whereas the inverse is the more likely you are to kind of ruin your life. Like, in an extreme example of like taking drugs all the time or something, you know, which is super, like, in the moment, short term beneficial and long term disastrous.
Just
but
turns
I think,
into psychology, doesn't it? I mean, like,
yeah,
you know, we are half chimp brain, if you know what I mean.
we are, and that's why it is
probably
hard
more
to
than
stick
half.
by. But if you know, the 12 rules were easy to follow, they probably wouldn't be as useful. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah,
to many people.
yeah. That's
Like,
true.
and a lot of things are much easier to, like, give advice about than they are to follow yourself. You know, that's just how things are. So you can sound like a sage when someone asks for your advice, but if they were, like, you know, over your shoulder for your whole life, they'd probably see that you're not taking that advice yourself a lot of the time.
Yeah,
you know?
and I mean, even Jordan Peterson admits it in his books that he doesn't follow them all the time because, you know, life happens and he slips up and things happen. And, you know, I remember there was a lot of people insulting him for having an untidy room because he did like a vlog in his room and there's a mess in the background.
That's hilarious. That's so funny.
You know, man, we should do an episode sometime on both. I'm reading his second, 12, was it Beyond Order at the moment? 12 More Rules for Life. We should do an episode on it. Go through them all. See what we think.
Yeah, I don't even know them, actually. Like, I read 12 Rules, like, when it came out, which is, what, 6 years ago now or
yeah,
something?
it was a while ago. Me too.
And
it's been a minute.
And it's been a minute, so I remember bits, but I don't even think I know any of the rules in the new book. So it might be interesting to see, with you having read it and me not, you know, maybe I would just be useless, but I would be interested to know what I can get from them having not read them and what you could teach me. So that could definitely be an episode that we could do.
Awesome. We should do it. Once I finish the book, I'll make some notes and then we can we can do it, man.
Yeah.
So
the great philosophers, which are Jordan Peterson, Seneca, and your mum, that we've been through. It's been great. Oh
yeah. So what about a bit of Naval? it's easier to
I'm
fulfill.
always here for a bit of Naval.
It's easier to fulfill your material desires than to renounce them. I think he's quite famous for that quote. It's so true.
Yeah, it is, and it's interesting because it kind of goes against, like, it's funny, isn't it? Because you know those, like, have you ever seen those, like, it's like a meme of, like, it shows the normal distribution graph, and it will show someone who's, like, in terms of, like, intelligence or experience, someone who's right at the far left hand side of the normal distribution with the lowest intelligence and experience and all the rest of it will say, like, you know, I don't want to fulfill my desire. Sorry, I don't want to, like, renounce my desires. I just want to fulfill them. And then there's, like, the people in the middle of, like, middle intelligence who are like, you must renounce your desires. And then the smart people on the other end of the tail are saying exactly the same thing as the dumb people, which is like, I might as well just fulfill my desires rather than try and, you know, renounce them. And so it's like, it's interesting because you would expect a very smart person like him to go with the renounce your desires, you know, side of argument, the kind of Buddhist, like, you know, renounce your desires, like desires bring you unhappiness and therefore you shouldn't have them. But actually, he's going with the opposite way. And I think, you know, that's probably interesting for a lot of people who have tried and struggled to, you know, quote unquote, renounce desires in their lives because they think that's like the righteous path or the intelligent path.
You know, man,
but
I actually don't know because I think he is advising to renounce your desires. I think he's just saying that, just stating that it is so difficult to be the person that renounces them that it's actually easier to get them. At least that's my interpretation of it. Just completely undoing what you just said, I think.
Yeah, possibly. Or undoing it, or maybe just...
I'm not sure what Naval actually
know.
thinks, is what I'm saying. I don't know if he thinks that you should fulfill them or your material desires. I don't know. I think, generally, I think it's good advice to probably... I don't think you shouldn't try and aim for getting material stuff, but you definitely shouldn't be like, it's the only thing there is that I want. It's like, you know, I want to build a business, and then the fruits of that, maybe I can, you know, that'll be quite fun, but it's not that important.
Sure. Well, I mean, one of my favourite podcasts of all time, like probably the podcast I've listened to the most, so maybe even my favourite podcast, was his appearance on Joe Rogan. Have you listened to that one? That was my introduction to Naval.
I think I've listened to it a couple times, yeah. But I think he's been on more than once.
Yeah. I think Joe Rogan, he's only been on once. I think because I remember him saying in another podcast that he would never do Joe Rogan again because he thinks sequels are always worse than the original films. And so he was like, I'm happy to just be known for that one podcast rather than go on and dilute my message.
There's only one. I got to listen to it again, third time around.
Yeah, I've listened to it, and people always exaggerate and say 20 times, maybe 4 or 5, which for like a 3-hour podcast is quite a few.
Yeah.
But I remember him saying in that podcast, it was the first time I'd heard the kind of Buddhist wisdom of, like, you know, he says, desire is a contract you make with yourself to not be happy until you get what you want. So he says his wisdom in that section is, be very cautious with desires and don't pick them up subconsciously. Like, don't just see a Instagram reel of a guy in a Ferrari and be like, I have to get that Ferrari to be happy. Because you probably can do that. You probably can devote your life, if you're smart enough, to working any kind of job just with the sole intention of saving up and buying a Ferrari. But the thing with that is that you pick that up because you were mindlessly watching, you know, an Instagram reel or something, and you saw that, and then you decided that was what you were going to do. Like, it's not very well thought out. And if you've picked that one up, you probably scrolled to the next reel and saw a big house and picked that one up as well. And if you've got like this endless list of them, you're just going to constantly consider yourself to be not enough, because the chances of you fulfilling them faster than you pick them up is just so low that you'll just constantly be in this state of lack. And so he says, like, you've got to, like, very philosophically list them and then cross most of them out, essentially, and work out what's like the one thing on this list that I actually, think I do need or I do want, and I am going to work towards, and I am going to devote a portion of my life to achieving, and the rest of them I'm just going to forget about as like, a kind of fantasy that is unrealistic and immature, essentially. And so, coupling that with the original Naval quote that we started on, I think, like with our last answer where you said there's a balance, I just think there's a balance again here. I think the renouncing side of the argument is like, not renounce all of them, but renounce 80 to 90% of them. And then the achieve them argument is like, take those last couple of points that you've kept on the page and, work on those, basically. And achieve those and be happy that you achieve those, but then don't just pick up 3 more the second you've achieved them necessarily, or you'll just spend your whole life chasing things.
I agree. I think it's about being happy, well, not happy, but content, say, even if you haven't achieved them. If you start to base your happiness on your material desires, I think that's where the problems root. But I agree with what you said about Naval. I think it's a good idea to have some material desires because it pushes you forward, eh? If you've got none, I don't know if that's a good thing, really. It's definitely better than wanting everything. You're probably going to be...
How achievable is it, really?
Quite unhappy.
That's my other question. Like, how achievable is having no desires?
Yeah, pretty bloody difficult. If not impossible.
When we get round to doing the official cognitive bias episode, like, I don't know if that's one of the biases, but I do wonder if, like, how many people who say they have no desires actually don't, and how many of them are self-deceiving.
Yeah. And also, I find that it changes from minute to minute. I mean, I'll want something for the first half of the day, and second half of the day, I don't really care. Definitely happens. I want to get a Lotus, though,
definitely,
but I know what it is. Do you know what I mean? Like, I know the good things and the bad things about it, and the annoying things, and it's not like a fantasy. It's just like, okay, I kind of want one, and it's not that unrealistic to get one either. So,
yeah, no, one Lotus is not. It's not as lofty as like a lot of young men, maybe a bit younger than us, who got sucked into the whole Andrew Tate thing. And I think we're lucky that we were interested in personal development before it became so like McDonald'sified, and before it just became this like stupid like trope of like this exaggerated kind of like,
mate, we would have got snapped up so easily.
Childish thing. I think we could have done if we were like 16 instead of 20 or something when he came around. It could have been bad, you don't know. But like, he's like the equivalent of Kylie Jenner for like girls who like see this like perfect body or whatever. It doesn't have to be her, it could be anyone, but girls who get really caught up in body image. I think for guys, the worst example of that is the guy who owns like 12 Bugattis or whatever he has in all the different colours.
It's
because
you heard what Jimmy Carr says about it? About Andrew Tate? He says he's what a 13-year-old thinks successful rich man looks like.
I think that's so true.
But it's not.
No. Well, it's true for a 13-year-old, but it's not true for an
real,
adult.
Yeah. And it's so far from like what I want, and I imagine what you want, that it's like, yeah. Glad that we're not that age.
It's the most internet thing ever, isn't it? It's like the most internet, like, it's like the wisdom of crowds gone wrong. You know what I mean? It's like all these young people, like, he's so popular because so many people look up to him, but they're not using the right half of their brains to get to that point where they decide he's like someone to look up to, because he's just like, I've got all the women and all the cars kind of thing.
It's actually really incredible that he's been able to do that. It's very impressive. That kind of
I was
winning the minds of all the 13-year-olds.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's super internetified, and I think he studied Donald Trump, or someone like that, to get to that point, because it's like the way he appeals to people by being like unabashedly like firm in what he and like playing into like, you know, like he goes down the brainstem, so to speak. Like, you know, as you go down the brainstem, you get more and more
Monkey
like
responses.
primeval.
Yeah.
Monkey response. Like it's kind of hijacking the limbic system, so to speak, of just being like, here are all the things that will make you happy, and I've got all of them. But like, you've got to wonder what he's sacrificed, and like you've got to wonder, you know, will he get married, and will he, like, all the things that like people say make you happy in your later life, like how many of those things will he have? Like, you know, he might go through some big transformation, but I don't think like he's got a very balanced foundation, basically. Like, he's maxed out certain stats.
When he probably end up in a prison cell, I don't know if what happened with the outcome of all that, but he was it he was pimping, wasn't he? It was like a sex ring or something.
Well, yeah, allegedly that's how he made all his money, right? Was he essentially moved to Romania because the laws were flexible if you had money, and then he was flying girls over there and then taking their passports away, basically, and making them, you know, do cam girl work for him.
He actually
and then
did
taking
that
like
then?
80% of the profit. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, that's the accusation, but it's he definitely had a cam girl business. Like, he 100% has said that. It's just a case of how he treated the employees and whether or not he let them leave and all the rest of
just
it. That is
having a cam girl business, in my opinion, is not great.
No, it's weird.
Yeah. Huh.
But, you know, him and his brother, they just were out there to make money, and like live the kind of pimp lifestyle that they decided they needed and they deserved, and they were successful in that. But I just don't think it's like ticking all the boxes of what makes a good life. It's just like maxing out a few stats at the detriment of all the others.
And what I find kind of crazy about it as well is he's become popular. Like, some of his most popular content is him insulting the audience, being like, "Here's why you're a pussy."
Yeah, and people are like, "Oh shit, I'm a pussy."
Yeah, you're damn right, I'm a pussy.
That works, actually, and that's advertising. Like, people have been doing that in advertising for a while, I think, you know, like companies telling you have issues that you didn't realize you had, and then like giving you solutions to them, sort of thing.
Yeah,
it's like creating the desires and making you subconsciously pick them up, to go back to Naval. And then, you know, now that you have this extra desire, you can pay money to solve it. And it's just like this bizarre loop of creating and then solving problems in your brain. And, you know, at the detriment of your bank account, essentially.
Yeah, they like that. Good job bringing it back to Naval as well. Look at that little cyclical structure we got going on there.
There we go. Last thing I'll say about him, which is funny, is that considering, like, it's also funny that people consider him like a voice for young men, like someone who's standing up for young men, when he admits himself that he basically made his money by tricking vulnerable young men who, you know, don't have their lives in order, into believing that these girls on cameras in Romania had fallen in love with them, and therefore they should give all their money to these women.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's the funniest hypocrisy of it all, is that he made his money by tricking young men, and now he's like, I am the voice of the young men. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know how he justifies those two things that seem to be completely at odds with each other.
I think he justifies it financially. It really is alarming that so many people can be won over by someone of you know, that kind of with those morals.
Yeah, I think the what he's honed in on is that, like, there's a lot of very dissatisfied young men online, and that part is definitely true, and that is the true point in what he says that grounds everything else he says, and lets people and makes people want to listen, even if it's like a load of crap.
I'm sure, yeah. I think I've seen content from him that isn't bollocks as well, which probably helps. Like, every now and then he comes out with a little nugget of wisdom. You're like, okay, but it's probably not his.
Oh, no, definitely some of the things he says is true. Like, if he was completely ungrounded, I don't think he would have nearly the amount of authority on anything that he said. Like, I think I've definitely heard things where I'm like, okay, yeah, that I agree with that.
Yeah. It's kind of like a less extreme version of Hitler, where it's like, I've been listening to this really good podcast. You should listen to it if you haven't. About Hitler. I think it's called Real Dictators. Yeah, it's called Real Dictators, and they have like this massive, like 25-part podcast series about Hitler. And man, it's crazy. It's so interesting because he really goes into the details of like, you know, there'll be 40 minutes just on Hitler's like childhood, and then 40 minutes on teenage years, 40 minutes, and then it goes through everything in a lot more detail than I've heard before. And what Hitler did that was so good that kind of won over, you know, like a significant portion of German citizens is just tailoring the content to the audience very specifically.
Yeah, I've heard this.
And then you can just
like
bring in
like
the extremist things later.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's like, have you seen? I saw this on Joe Rogan, and then I looked them up myself afterwards. AI has there's like an AI that can translate his speeches into English.
That.
What?
It's crazy.
Yeah, while keeping his tone. Yeah, and it's awesome. And part of like what they said in that clip, which is true, is like you assume when you, as a non-German speaker, you assume that like he's on some crazy rant about like the Jews or something, but he's not. He's just he's like addressing real concerns of the German people, kind of thing, and doing a really good job of like bringing out their patriotic fervor and like getting themselves to support him, and saying a lot of things that are probably true and probably were the lived experiences of the German citizens. And I've also heard what you mentioned about how he used to tailor his speeches, like if he's in an urban centre, he'll address those issues, and if he's in an agricultural area, he'll address those. And sometimes they were completely at odds with each other, but
doesn't matter.
Maybe that wouldn't work quite so well now with the internet, but back then he could do that. And I do think, and I'm not saying Trump is Hitler at all, and I'm also not saying Andrew Tate is Hitler, but
no. We're not saying that.
It's
just
the
to
same
be clear.
thing. Yeah, to be clear, but those guys do that as well, where they, they know their audience very well. Like they know what's going to like resonate with the audience in certain moments, and so that's what they speak on, and that's why a lot of it you can hear it and go, that's pretty true.
Yeah.
But then it's like, what else are their intentions? You know what I mean? And Hitler's an super extreme example, but that's why it's a good analogy, you know?
Absolutely, man. I agree. And just also to be clear, for our many listeners, about the Hitler speech thing, because I interrupted you when you're explaining it. What we're referring to is there's a video on YouTube where AI has taken one of Hitler's speeches in German, translated it to English speech, but it's still got his German tone of him basically shouting it at the audience. So it's very interesting to listen to. I listened to it while I was in the bath one time. It was a unique experience.
What a location for it. But yeah, it is very cool, and it like you say, it keeps his German accent. So like it sounds like his voice, but it's just in English.
Yeah. And
it conveys a lot of the passion that if you've just got like a voiceover of someone just like saying it in English over the top, like you get on the news when they're like translating someone who's being interviewed in a foreign language, you lose a lot of that. So it is fantastic. It's very cool.
Equally though, my friend is German, and he said that you still lose a lot. The AI still lost a lot of the kind of. He's like, it's just not the same.
It's just not as cool as Hitler. It's just not. Yeah, no, but you know that is a consistent issue with translation. Not to completely derail the conversation and start talking about languages, but you do always lose a lot if you don't understand the implications and the meanings of every word, because you can't translate words to their exact connotations to an audience with a different culture and a different language. So anyway, let's get to another quote before we ramble, because this is the Naval section still, I think.
Yeah, okay. Let's move on.
Yeah, let's do another one.
I'm pretty sure this is Marcus Aurelius, a great quote from Meditations, which is, no more roundabout discussion of what makes a good man. Be one. And he says this...
Shit, we got to end this podcast. Go be man.
He says this in the midst of discussion about how to be a good man. And I guess it's just kind of that whole experience of if you have to put what you study into practice at some point. You have to actually just go ahead and do it.
Sure. I mean, I don't think Marcus Aurelius would have said the term mental masturbation in any of his work, but that's what that is, And it feels like work and it feels like progress, but a lot of the time it's not. So you can't just listen to a podcast about something and then assume you've internalized it and changed as a person. Like, the implementation is the actual work, and that is like the thing between you and achieving the thing you want to achieve, not necessarily the knowledge.
So what do you do to implement self-improvement things that you have learnt?
Ooh, I mean, I've heard a lot of self-improvement stuff in my life, and I'm sure there's loads of it that I've never implemented. To be transparent, obviously, like, there's plenty of things that I know I should be doing and I'm not. But I mean, for me right now, it's just maxing out my studies, maxing out the Mandarin, and like trying to embody and internalize and put into practice things related to that to get that up. And then there are other areas that, like, you can't do everything at once. So
no, you've got that
maybe
single-minded focus at the moment, haven't you? Yeah, you have to.
Sure, and
as a student,
we're going back to Naval again, I guess, of being like, what are the desires that I'm trying to like focus on right now? And so if I hear like a ton of gym advice, it's like I'm not necessarily in my gym season. Like, I'm trying to go a few times a week and I'm succeeding, but you can't you can't expect to get the best possible results there in the gym and max out maybe the career things that you're working on, for example, all at the same time. Like, you can achieve a balance, you can be consistent, blah blah blah, but like, they're not optimal results in every area. That's just not possible. There's not enough hours in the day.
I think
so
once you get past uni, you do have to start to make some sacrifices based on your goal. Like, say for example, I want to build a brilliant tech business. Okay, I'm going to have to give up a good portion of revenue for the tech business just to keep my body in shape. Like, I could just become a slob and have probably more success, although arguably less if you're a slob. Like, maybe you are less productive if you don't work out or whatever, but ignoring that, you have to spend time working out, and then you're just sacrificing time that you could have spent on your business. And you have to really consciously, I think, make these trade-offs. So when you're at uni, you just want to max it out, right? I did. I just wanted to 100% max out economics and maybe do a few workouts just to keep my brain from exploding. I think now it's very different. I've had to make very conscious decisions of what I spend time doing. So I, work out, read, code, work. That's literally it. That's my life.
Sure, and listening to self-help content about other topics might well, take you off course, essentially, and, just being mindful of the fact that you can't implement everything. You just have to be focused on what you're trying to do. To talk about your original question to me, which was how do I implement the things, I just think you can only implement so much at once, and you can't make radical changes to yourself, to your life, very quickly. And trying to is usually a fool's errand. So I think you just have to either limit your consumption of the content such that you can implement everything you hear because you don't hear that much, or selectively ignore certain advice. Because the only danger is trying to onboard it all at once, because you won't, and that can be very demoralizing. If you're listening to tons of self-help content, and then every moment of your life you're reminded of the fact that you haven't actually onboarded all of this information. Like, you hear loads of advice about relationships or something, and then you see issues in your relationship, for example, and you can't have the expectation that you're going to be able to implement everything. And so if your relationship's like your most important thing, then focus on achieving those, but don't also expect to get optimal fitness results and optimal career results all at the same time.
I'd say there's a bit about there's even a self-improvement tip right here about self-improvement, which is you really shouldn't be feeling bad if you can't absorb it all. Like you might learn 30 cool self-improvement tips and only 2 of them are actually any good in your life. So I think it's worth noting, like, you know, it's no bad thing to not absorb it all.
Definitely. And I actually think self-improvement advice related to self-improvement is some of the best self-improvement advice there is.
Probably.
Because there's such an abundance of it now, you know. It's not like the pre-internet world where, you know, like your self-improvement advice would come from like your dad or something. And it you know, you could achieve those things and feel like you're on a path, because now more than ever, going back to Seneca, we're trying to link all these ones in, but you've got the opportunity, like the wind is blowing in all directions at the same time if you want it to be. And I think that can be overwhelming for people. And I also think it comes back to like the desire thing of like, you like the world is clearer now to everyone through their phones than it is in any time in history, and you know you could do this thing or that thing or this thing or that thing, and you just have to pick your direction essentially, because otherwise you can literally just spend all your time listening to self-help, and a lot of these guys disagree with each other because there's no one way of achieving success. So a lot of these people just vehemently disagree with each other.
Yeah, follow your passion.
And so if you're
don't follow your passion.
Yeah,
They're
exactly.
like,
and it's like that is overwhelming.
Yeah, definitely is. And it's funny because the person who says, you know, you should absolutely not follow your passion, and the person who says you should follow your passion, they're both right. It just depends on what you want.
They could have the exact same level of material success, and have done it completely different ways. So you definitely have to listen to yourself. I don't think there's any amount of introspection that you can do that's too much, to be honest.
Probably not.
And consuming content is not introspection. It's extrospection. You know, you're looking
Is that a
outside of
word?
yourself.
I don't know.
I don't know. It is now.
Yeah, great. We're inventing new words here today. My method for keeping up with all of the self-improvement tips that I hear, or not necessarily self-improvement, might be business or whatever, philosophy, is say I listen to a lot of podcasts to get at it. You know, there's some of the greatest minds in the world do podcasts. So I just screenshot the podcast and then put it in a little folder on my phone, and then there's a backlog. There's a backlog of like 50 tips on there, but I'm not stressed about it. It doesn't matter. When I get round to it, I'll start writing them down. And it's nice because you hear them again a few months later, you know what I mean? So I hear it while I'm at work. I'm like, oh, that's a good tip. I need to implement that sometime. And then maybe a few months later, pop it in the little Great Wave book I'm reading from. And then, we end up talking about it on here. And then maybe I'll implement it when I read this book before bed sometime. But man, I recommend doing that. If you get around to it.
Yeah, and I don't do that. So maybe that's something I can implement.
I recommend
or not,
it. And it's also because you're writing a book. So, you know what I mean? I've just got a bookshelf with my book on it, The Great Wave. And you go in, and it's whatever I want in it. I literally read it back, like, cover to cover sometimes, because it's so interesting. Because it's like personalized tips that you've forgotten that you really liked from a year ago. And then you read them again. Yeah.
Beautiful, man. Okay, do we have any more?
Yep. I've got one right here by Epictetus.
Let's go. Cool. We're going through all of them.
Oh, yeah. All the Stoics. Remember, it's impossible to learn that which you think you already know. And I think this is a very famous quote as well. Have you heard it before?
I haven't. Talk to me about it.
I guess we could flip back to the old Andrew Tate thing. Maybe that's not the best example, but say for example, Andrew Tate tells you something about women, right? Something maybe slightly misogynistic, though I imagine his followers won't agree with that. But say he says something that is slightly misogynistic, and then you're a 13-year-old, and you're like, okay, this is fact. I know about women. This is the way they behave. And then there's evidence that contradicts that in the real world. You can't learn it. If you think you already know it, how are you going to improve in that area and maybe become better at dealing with women or interacting with women, say, for example, as a 13-year-old boy, when you already have this worldview that you've picked up? So I guess it's really battling the ego and the arrogance of thinking you know stuff. Just a good reminder, let's say. So you heard the quote, like, you can learn something from anyone. I can't remember what it is. Something like that. Everyone has something to teach you.
Confucius has one of those as well.
What's that?
Chinese philosophy. Confucius, the Chinese philosopher, has a similar quote. Basically you can learn from anyone. And I actually think that's a Jordan Peterson one as well. I think that's one of his 12 rules.
That probably makes it true then.
Am I wrong about that?
No, I think you're right. I think it's in his first
true.
book. Yeah, you can learn something from anyone. Yeah.
Let's have a look. Learn from anyone. I don't know. I don't want to sit here and stare at my screen and try and find it.
Well, we'll get around to it.
I'm pretty sure that's one of the 12 rules. Yeah.
When we do,
we could do a Jordan Peterson focused episode. Yeah.
24 rules for life on the shed.
Yeah, let's condense them down. Yeah, that's actually not a bad idea for an episode.
Yeah, we should do it. I guess I don't know if there's much more to talk about with that Epictetus quote. It's pretty straightforward. It's just overcoming your ego, really. If you think you know stuff, how are you going to learn it if you actually don't know it?
Sure, and that could also quite easily be one of the cognitive biases, I think, right? Like thinking you know stuff when actually you don't. You've just heard it from someone.
100% a bias. I can picture it in the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yeah.
But there's probably other biases. By the way, it's biases, not biases. I asked my mum.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I was
like philosopher we've talked about.
Yeah, I think I've got some quotes from my mum in this book a couple times, you know. She's a great philosopher.
No, honestly, a lot of mums and grandmas have a lot of that kind of thing. My grandma was definitely one with a lot of quotes, and now my mum quotes them, so I think she's getting to that age.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, if you think just not that long ago, it would have been your elders where you got all of your personal self-help tips,
exactly,
like you said earlier.
Exactly. That it's only now become a case where you can feel like you have some kind of intimate relationship with someone you've never met on the internet, you know. Sure, people did speeches, and then there was radio, but this is next level, you know.
Well, the other thing they had is the Bible and other religious texts.
Yeah, we can't miss that one out.
No, I mean that's still very much used, isn't it, as a source of it is really self-help, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it definitely is, and I think, I don't know. I've never read the Bible, and I'd actually quite like to.
Yeah, I haven't.
Not just read it, but have it dissected, and because there's definitely loads of advice and loads of wisdom in there. I mean, it's the backbone of Western civilization, really. So
yeah.
I mean, that's what Jordan Peterson does a lot of, right? Is he does a lot of analyzing some of the stories from the Old Testament and that kind of thing. And I wish I knew more, to be honest, because I feel like it's probably one of the densest, best self-help books ever written. I know it kind of sounds ridiculous, like bro science, manosphere, like the Bible is a self-help book, but I think it probably has tons of wisdom that I'm not aware of.
Yeah, it's probably got some good nuggets in there. I imagine it's a hard read. Pretty.
Oh yeah, no, I think it's one of those that you sit down and do a chapter with a priest or someone who's spent their whole life reading it, and that's where you get the advice from. Yeah. So yeah, Christians in the comments, tell us we need Jesus and help us out with that.
The real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes.
Damn, we're getting very introspective today, aren't we? I love all of these because a lot of it comes down to subconscious and humility and all of those kinds of things, and needing those things to improve your life as opposed to looking to the outside world.
You are the
I think
root of self-help, aren't you? Within yourself. That is where it is.
you are. And I think the same place where I heard the quote I said earlier about you don't pursue success, you attract it. I think the same guy says something to the extent of like, working on you can work on yourself or you can work on your career. And like if you work on your career, you can achieve, a level of success, but it will probably be a much larger level of success if you just work on yourself, because that in turn will work on your career because you'll be more aware of the career that suits you and all the rest of it. Like I think introspecting on your desires and your talents and all the rest of it is something everyone can do more of, to be honest.
It links right up with the wind and port quote, sailing to the ports, because it just
does.
Oh mate, look at this episode. It's beautiful how it's all linking up.
It is. We're doing a good job.
I think it's very much figure out what you want first, or just figuring out what you want in, not even first, but just figuring out full stop is like, that's a very introspective thing. So going to what you said about someone scrolling on TikTok or whatever and they see a Ferrari, they're like, I want the Ferrari. That's my goal. Is so far removed from being the guy who introspects and is like, this is what I want in my life. And to be fair, it could be a Ferrari. It probably won't be.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong in and of itself of wanting a Ferrari.
No.
It's just how rigorous was your process to get to that desire, and a lot of the time it's not.
Like, I would find it a bit more believable if they were like, I want a Ferrari, I want to put it in my garage, and I want to like make it look beautiful, the most beautiful Ferrari in the world, and just polish that sucker, modify it, or maybe don't modify it because they'll kill you, they'll sue you, won't they?
Yeah.
Maybe do a Lamborghini or something.
Yeah.
Then maybe it's a bit more believable that they found that within themselves from all the introspection, but they probably didn't.
Yeah. Word. Good point.
Like, how much will it matter when you're 90?
Yeah, that's another good topic we've not talked about that you get in a lot of self-help books. I think I first read this in The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, the Stephen Covey one. Did you read that book?
I've listened to it, but I've forgotten all the books I listened to. They just disappear from my brain, so I've got to read it.
Yeah, reading is, yeah. So I've done both, actually. I listened to it first and then I bought a copy. But he talks about, what is your ideal funeral eulogy that you could write for yourself, because that comes back to a quote I said earlier about how all that self-help is trying to get you to prioritize the long term over the short term, and that's like the ultimate version, because it's so long term that like you're not even there for it. So prioritizing that is not necessarily the easiest thing to do, because you want to solve the problems right in front of you, but if you can orient yourself to focus on the short-term problems that lead to the optimum long-term solution, then that's what you got to do. And a lot of people will say if they talk about their own eulogy is actually relationships and the impact they had on people and the people they loved and their friends and all the rest of it, and how they want to be remembered by them. And a lot of the time the stuff about the Ferrari is not going to be included in your eulogy, is it?
No.
It would be a bit weird if people just mention that.
Yeah, it would be a little odd. I think it's like it makes you increase your perspective to like be much more cosmic, let's say, where you really are looking at the picture of what is my impact as a human being in my life. So yeah, it's definitely very good food for thought when considering what you want to do in the future.
Definitely.
Have you?
And I think we should do a relationship themed episode at some point soon.
Yeah.
Because I think that's another great one, and we've barely touched on them today. So that could be a whole fresh, territory.
Absolutely,
that
we
could discuss. Yeah.
I am down. I was just going to mention, have you heard where the origin of the Nobel Prize?
The fact that he made a bunch of bombs, right? He invented like TNT or something.
Yeah, but do you know why he came up with the prize?
No.
He saw his eulogy. He saw, like, they leaked it. The press leaked it, so they wrote it before he died. They leaked it, and he read it, and he was like, "Oh no, I'm remembered as the destroyer of something." It wasn't the destroyer of worlds. I can't remember what it was. It's like
Yeah.
the death merchant or something like that.
Yeah.
And
yeah. That's crazy.
yeah, he was like, that cannot be my legacy. So yeah, he created the Nobel Prize. So
And now Nobel is synonymous with peace. He did a very good job, actually.
yeah, he did a very good job. And that is exactly what you were talking about in action, isn't it? Of just, if you have that long-term perspective of what do you remember when you're, what goals do you want to achieve when you're 90 or after you've died, then how do you want to be remembered? That is him living that, going from inventing dynamite to making a peace prize. Yeah. Really cool.
Yeah. Crazy. Incredible. So that's yeah. Long-term thinking is super important, and we can all do more of that as well. So
Yeah.
I think that's a great one.
Like you said earlier, yeah, long-term, just the whole of self-help is basically just increasing from short-term to long-term perspective, isn't it? Yeah. That's it.
Well,
We've solved it.
We've solved it, man. Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go. We've solved self-help on our third podcast.
Should we wrap it up?
This is the end of the shed. Yeah, I'm down to wrap up. I was just thinking the same thing.
Yeah, man.
Now that we've solved self-help, we can just go and live our lives.
No one will ever have to listen to anything ever again.
Oh, yeah. We all know that will happen.
Yeah. Every self has been helped.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm glad we could do it.
Right, man. It's been great talking to you.
Yeah, as always. All right.
Peace.
Let's wrap it up. See you boys next time.
All right, man. How was that?